Hey friends, welcome to the Page of Our Lives. I'm one of your hosts, Leslie Stewart. As a mom, I know parenting is not for the weak. It takes our whole physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional selves to parent well, not to mention having eyes in the back of our heads. But what are we to do when we're worn out from parenting? On today's show, Paige and I talk with Kelli Wild, a family therapist who is passionate about helping weary moms and dads find rest for their souls. As Kelli puts it, parental burnout is a real thing, and when it sets in, it can affect the whole family. As parents, we can't afford to ignore our needs forever, and that's why today's show is so important. So join us as we talk about soul care for weary parents on this episode of The Page of Our Lives. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Page of Our Lives. We're so excited you're joining us today. We have a very special guest with us. Kelli Wild is a mom of four, and she has been a family therapist for 30 years. She is a wealth of wisdom, and Kelli is super passionate about helping weary parents find soul care and peace and strength in their parenting journey. And today we're going to talk with her about kind of all of that and what it looks like to be a more attuned parent. And Kelli, we're just so happy to have you. So welcome to the show. And thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you bet. We're glad to have you. And we just want to kind of kick things off. Would you just share a little bit with our listeners about your family, yourself, kind of how'd you get into all of this business?
Sure. Well, I'm married to Dean, and we've been married 27 years. I'm not going to lie. There's a point, I think when you cross over 25, you start getting the calculator out to I was like 27. Yeah.
You did a chart on the wall.
I know, right? We have four kids. Three are young adults now. So 25, 23, and 19. And then we have a 14-year-old still in the house who just started high school. And I guess, I really started this journey of serving parents by working with kids. And in high school, I was very involved in a ministry called Young Life. And I
love Young Life.
I know, I love Young Life. I was always drawn to the tough kid, and I ended up working at a group home for boys, which was really interesting to do at age 20, 21.
Yeah.
And I got out of school and I worked in a psychiatric hospital for teenagers and then with kids in foster care. And I really had a desire to go back to school at that point and grow in my knowledge of how to really help kids heal. And then, the journey has gone on from there. And so I think when you really look at helping children, what I've discovered is the most powerful way to do that is to help their parents. And so when parents are okay, when parents have experienced their own healing, when they have the tools they need, they're really important. But the kid is one piece of the puzzle, but you really have to look at the whole puzzle. And in that, I really began to see just really weary parents, and we all come to life with our own stuff. Life can be hard. And then some of us are raising children with really exceptional needs. And so in that, they just were not okay, and so really pausing to focus on them became a passion of mine, because I know in the end, that's one of the best gifts we can give, not only them, but also their children.
So yeah, Kelli, describe a family that would benefit from all the resources that you have, because I would imagine what the family that we think of in our head are like, oh, they're so good. It's just that child that probably has some issues or whatever. But then the reality is that no, those parents have some stuff going on too. And then I would imagine the pandemic brought up even more issues with families. So So
Yes.
yeah, describe a family. So if somebody who's listening to this is like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm that family or not. So
Yeah. I always think of it like, and I think every parent can relate to this part. You feel like you're on this hamster wheel and you're just running and running to try to meet all the needs. And you're getting worn out, and you're starting to have more of that sense of like some deeper things are starting to kind of maybe pop out, spill over. And you don't really want to keep doing it this way, but you cannot see a way off. You cannot see a way off the hamster wheel. And I think any of us can be in that place as a parent. And I do think when you have children that maybe have up and above needs, it's possible that's even exponentially increased because, you're trying to meet their needs maybe related to their past history of trauma or their exceptional medical needs. There's just a lot of battles going on. I think the parent that would relate to my resources is probably feeling pretty alone, because they don't feel a lot of people get it. And their journey has often actually caused isolation for them. They may not be getting the invite to the birthday parties. They may not feel they have anyone they can leave their child with so they can go get out and do self-care that, people talk about. I think any of us can be in that place, but especially parents who've been running for a long time and they just don't see how things are going to change. And so my goal is to really help them change in the midst of their circumstances, because sometimes our circumstances will change. Sometimes we don't have a lot of control over that, but we can work on us within it and still figure out how to lower our stress and make some choices towards peace within it.
I love that. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Every parent, whether that's kind of your life or it's a season that you're in. I think everyone can relate to that for sure, Kelli. One of the things I know you're really passionate about is attuned parenting. So can you kind of explain to us, what is attuned parenting? How would you define that?
Sure. So attunement is a word, you'll kind of find it often in the attachment literature. I sort of grabbed onto that phrase because for me, it means a few things, but I have this saying, it's me, we, thee. So me, I got to start with me. Then we focus on we, meaning relationships in the family, and then the you. A lot of times we want to start with the you, like you need to change. I need you to fix my kid, like, you, right? But when we start at that layer, it's usually a Band-Aid fix. And so we got to start at the me, because it's that foundational piece. So to attune into God, what is he saying? Where am I at in that journey? I mean, maybe some people are just, I don't know, starting or have questions. And me, like my own journey, right? Like what broken pieces maybe am I bringing to the table? What do I need to figure out about me? Because even my learning to calm down in a moment before I respond, right, can change a lot of things. And so attuned parenting starts with attuning to you, to yourself, to your God, to your needs, to your healing, so that then we can offer that. And then we do often a better job of attuning to the needs of our kids, to walking them through the tough stuff. So, It's not at all about being perfect or having it all together. I think the truth is, we can all scroll on whatever social media site you're on and think everyone else has it together. But I've been in a lot of homes over the years, and I will tell you, none of us have it all together. It's always a journey. It's always a process. But if we're on the hamster wheel, we are usually just running so hard that we're not choosing. We just find ourselves, right, doing that default thing, doing that repetitive pattern, maybe from the family that we came from, and we inherited that, and we want to change it, but we don't even have the bandwidth to pause long enough to think about it and to make some choices. And then you got to learn how to do it. If I want to do this differently, that sounds good, but how do you do it? Right. So learning those new practical tools. So
that's what I want to know. I want to know, what are those practical tools? Because I remember whenever we've all been in medical crises at some point, like each one of us have had to deal with some type of medical crisis. So, and when you're in the midst of that chaotic, traumatic time, you're just trying to survive, and you can't, it's so hard. I remember a social worker when Corey was in the hospital with her first getting listed for a liver transplant, and the lady, she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm just, if anybody would ask, "Are you okay?" it triggers the waterworks. You just are like, "No, I'm not okay. I'm not okay." And I remember her telling me, and she put her hand in front of her face, and she's like, "Listen, this transplant's right here, it's right in front of your face." But then she moved her hand to behind her ear, on the side, and she's like, "But eventually it's going to be over here. And it won't be you're right in your face all the time, suffocating you constantly. It is going to go over here. So you're going to get there." But talk to us about the person, you're in it right now. What do we do? What are some practical things to take care of our own souls, to attune to ourselves? Wait a second, what's going, this wrestling within me, this overwhelm, where all I want to do is just cry and shut the door and isolate and just go to bed. So
I know it's hard to capture that in a handful of sentences.
Right. But and it's okay. You take as many sentences as you need.
I think, the example you gave of going through that medical journey, I think in the midst of it, what we naturally do is we enter survival mode, right? Yeah. And we are hardwired to protect our children. Yeah. And, most of us as parents, we'd hop in front of them, we'd take a bullet, we'd give them our liver, we'd do what we could, right? Somehow in that, we have to recognize that we are going to need to refuel that gas tank, and that's not selfish. It's really a need instead of a want. Now, how you come to terms to do that in your current circumstances and season may look a little different, right? Person to person. But I think it does start by recognizing this is not selfish. This is actually part of my caring for my child, because what you're in is possibly a marathon, and we all start running like it's a sprint. Right, and the truth is, if you attempt to keep that pace, you're going to hit such a wall that you're possibly not going to be able to keep going in a way that your child would need, you need, there's other household members, right? Possibly. So I know you well enough, Paige, to know you have a lot of really rich relationships in your life, and that's not the case for everyone. But even if it is that social worker in the hospital, I think starting by finding a safe place where you can really be as honest as you can. because you're going to have a lot of mixed feelings in there. There's a lot of grief associated with this process, and some people aren't so sure that that hand's going to ever be behind their ear. I was just working on something I'm going to be putting to the folks on my email list, and I don't know if this is helpful, but I feel like understanding too just how God wired us. We all have our unique personalities. We all have different circumstances, but even at a biological level, when you are in crisis, when you are facing something that is causing that part of you to have that survival response, we automatically are shifted to a different part of our brain, right? We're functioning out of the amygdala. That's that part where we house, flight, freeze, or fight. We've all heard that. But that part of the brain is designed really for short-term spurts. So I always talk with clients I've worked with, I think, okay, if you went out your door right now, you're walking to your car, and all of a sudden a bear jumped out near you, immediately your brain's going to go into that place. I've got to run, I've got to freeze, I've got to fight this thing. When that part of the brain is activated, your frontal lobe cannot be in charge. And that's the part of the brain where you have logical thinking, cause and effect. You can plan things out. That's kind of that part of the brain we want our kids to function in, right? When we're like, why did you do this? I'm like, where's that brain? They're not up there. But if you are dealing with a child who's chronically sick, or whatever your circumstances are that are hard, and let's talk about the pandemic, okay? It has been bear after bear after bear after bear. That part of the brain, again, was not designed to sustain ongoing, right? It was supposed to be survive, fight the bear, move on. But many of us, and especially during this pandemic, have just been in battle after battle. And so that residing in that place, it changes your neurochemistry. It changes your ability to think things through. And so even just recognizing there are aspects of what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, maybe you've been struggling with anxiety, depression, it's not your fault. Chances are your brain is just in this hyperactive mode of bear fighting, And so we've got to figure out, even in the midst of the battle, how to get off that hamster wheel long enough and do what we need to do to calm that down a bit. And that's even going to help us think, right? Come up with a plan. Right now, it might feel like I can't even, I'm on this wheel, I'm going, I can't, I'm fight. We're fighting systems. We're fighting insurance companies, school systems. When you have a kid with special needs going on, it feels like a constant battle, not to say even what's going on in the household, right? So what might work for you in that hospital could be giving yourself permission to cry and let somebody come and sit in the room with your child for 2 hours. Most of us don't want to walk away from that bedside, right? But we might need to. We might really need to do that, and that's not selfish. So like soul care, we talk a lot about self-care nowadays, and there's value to that. But most of the parents I work with, if you were, we always hear this, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first. Okay, in principle, we get that. But they just want to roll their eyes. Like, are you kidding me? Are you going to send a nanny over here to take care of my kids? Are you going to pay the medical bills? Are you going to, how am I supposed to do that? So soul care is, to me, it's a much deeper level. Like, I love to go get mani-pedis if you can afford it. A bubble bath is great, but this is really about tending to our emotions, our thoughts, Yes, we all have laundry to do. Yes, it's a challenge. But even if I start by carving out 10 minutes, right? Even if I give myself permission and maybe I let the kids watch TV an extra half hour that I don't really think they should be in front of that screen, but oh well, because right now I need to go outside and have a cup of coffee on the porch and breathe because I got to signal to that part of the brain. I call that part of the brain Amy because it's the amygdala. I'm like, Amy, I don't need you.
I love that.
Amy, I'm going to need you to quiet down a little bit right now.
Yeah, this is the frontal lobe. So I call that flow. So I'm like, and sometimes I work with kids and we teach them this and we call it different things, you're just like, look, Amy, like settle down. You're not in charge. Okay. Like, I don't need you. But these two parts of the brain cannot be in charge at the same time. We're wired because think about it. If I walked out and there was a bear, and my frontal lobe and my amygdala were arguing over who could be in charge, I would be like, well, what kind of plan should we come up with? I don't know. What do you think? Like, there's not time for that. Immediately, Amy takes over because we have to survive.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have been living with Amy in charge in that sense.
I don't need to tell her to bow down.
Girl, bow down. You are not in charge. But, we need her. I mean, we were wired to have to deal with what we have to deal with. And a lot of people are in very difficult circumstances, but to recognize, my physiological self cannot sustain this.
Right.
If I'm going to be here in the next 5 years to walk.
I remember you, Kelly, one time when in one of your, I don't know if it was at church or it was somewhere, and you were talking about kids being kind of like, you use like a gas gauge is the analogy. Or when they're on like red, you cannot have like a conversation. You can explain that more, but you cannot have a conversation with them. And I still to this day bring that up, like with my husband, especially my son. He can be like hot in a hot moment. Like it takes 1 second. And then my husband will try to want to teach him something when he's hot. And I'm like, you can't, like, you got to wait till he gets back in the green. And like, you got to wait till so explain how that kind of works. I feel like
Okay. Yeah. I love that. So I wasn't the creator of that concept. There's it's called How Does Your Engine Run?
Okay.
And we usually do, like Paige was saying, a little like gas gauge. So there's, green, and then you go into the yellow and then red. And some kids actually, or all of us, have like a blue section. And that would actually be when our brain is it's lulled, like we're kind of struggling to like wake it up and get going. But that green area, that's that nice, okay, it's revving at a good pace. I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling calm. My brain is regulated. Yellow, it's kind of starting to get a little edgy. Now, all of us can look different in the yellow. And so I don't like people to always think of it like emotionally. I mean, yellow for some kids might be, they're starting to get really silly, Another one might be kind of getting a little sassy, right? That blood sugar's dropping. They're kind of getting a little pushy. Red is what you might think, right? But in terms of the brain, I'm dysregulated. Okay. Now for one kid, it might be an all-out tantrum on the ground, and we have 3-year-old versions of that and 16-year-old versions. But as adults, we have 43-year-old versions.
Yeah, we do.
That, right? And the reality is, most of the time when our kids are in the red is when our buttons are getting pushed. And we're going to come on in there and we want to teach them, right? How many times have I told you, and you need to clean your room and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you think about it from a brain-based perspective, when we're in the red and we're dysregulated in that manner, Amy's in charge. Yeah. Okay. Amy is not good with words, right? She doesn't process.
Sorry to all the Amy's out there.
Sorry, Amy. I mean, the bear, in that moment, look, we're running. We're not having a conversation. Our digestion's shutting down. Our heart rate is raised. Our breathing is increased. We're surviving right now. So when our kids are in that state, and we come in and we try to lecture them, we are literally talking to a brain that cannot comprehend at that point.
Yeah.
There is no teaching that can happen. So you're wasting energy. And by the way, with the work that I'm doing, that's another thing. In terms of the practical skills, there's a lot of parenting advice out there, and I've been doing parenting stuff for years. But there's not a lot about how to heal and get what you need as a parent.
Right.
But we're going to drop a parenting nugget here and there along the way, but it's always going to come from the perspective of reserving your energy in the right way. So we're using a lot of energy, but sometimes we're using it inefficiently. So for me to have like a negotiation with a 4-year-old, right? Blah, 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 who's in the red, I am just wasting a whole lot of gas. I'm not going to get back and nothing's going to change. So it would be better for me to recognize what's going on and possibly help that kid calm down if they need my help, and that can work. Sometimes it can, sometimes it may not. But once the child's in the green and I'm in the green. So I always tell parents, you have to be in the green so you can lend your green to your child. If you're not, that's where that kind of attuned parenting comes in. I need to start recognizing that in myself and learning and doing what I need to do. It doesn't mean that I'm letting the kid be in charge and run the show. Right. And sometimes we grew up that way, thinking, I got to come in with a heavy hand. I'm in charge.
You're going to mind me and you're going to obey me.
You're going to obey me, but you're wasting a lot of energy, because really, if I just gave you some space and said, you know what, when we're both calm, we'll talk about this. I'm still going to be in charge. We're still going to deal with it. I'm remaining in my position as loving leader, and I haven't wasted a whole bunch of energy and hurt that relationship often, right? Because that's usually the time when we like say things we may later regret. So yeah, green, yellow, red, but red is Amy.
Yeah. Oh,
that's girl. So good, Kelli. I'm like, I'm playing all the conversations I should never have had.
And that's the thing. Don't be too hard on yourself or anyone listening. We've all done it. And it's just that whole principle. Like when we know better, we can try to grow, and then we try to do better. And even in that, we're going to mess up sometimes. I always tell people, look, the only perfect parent in the room is God. The rest of us are like doing the best we can. But part of that is pausing long enough to evaluate and become more self-aware. So if you find yourself saying, well, that's just how I am, that's how my family is, that's just, if that's what you want, that's okay. But you're never stuck with that. You can choose. You can learn to do it differently. Like I didn't come to the table with this stuff. My husband and I did not. We're not perfect. You could interview any 4 of our kids and they will tell you that. But we've learned a lot, and we've tried, and we've made the changes as we've learned them. And, and I do think in the end, we can stand back and go, we did the best we knew to do with what we had, but we didn't just say, well, that's just how it is, and I'm stuck with it.
Yeah.
I say, well, that's what I got, but I don't know if I want it or not.
I love that you said that, because I think depending upon what season of parenting you're in, if you're like where Paige and I are, where we're raising teenagers, or even where you are, Kelli, where the majority of your children are young adults, sometimes you start learning about these sorts of things and you look back on the way you had done it and you feel you have shame or guilt, or you think like, well, it's too late now. Right. But I love that you said that, because I'm a believer that like you parent till you're no longer on this earth, in my opinion. And, it looks different in all the stages and ages of your children, but you parent from the moment they're born to the moment you're no longer here. And I don't believe it's ever too late to do a lot of the things that you're talking about today. And so I just want to encourage, could you just take a minute and just encourage maybe some of our listeners who maybe feel like it's too late?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Leslie. It is not too late. I mean, if you even looked and reflect on your own life, and maybe you experienced some painful things, right, with your parent or grandparent or whoever raised you, and would it make any difference if at age 60 or 70 or whatever that was, they came to you and they owned it and they asked for forgiveness and they said, could we try to move forward differently?
Yeah.
And maybe it would be bumpy and maybe it would be hard, but that might really feel pretty amazing. That, I mean, many people never have that happen.
Yeah.
You know, so for us to go, yeah, like I look back at the beginning of our parenting journey and God, Lord, you know, we were our poor first kid. I mean, he laughs sometimes. He'll come in and see how we are with kid number 4. And he's like, are you kidding me? You're letting her watch that show, or you let her read that book, or she just voiced back to you. Like if I had done that, well, part of it is we're tired, but the other part is, and we parented through a third school year of a pandemic, but the other part really is we've changed.
Yeah.
And some things that we thought we needed to be more rigid about, or what obedience looked like, right? Or maybe we brought our red when now we've learned to do better with green.
Yeah.
I'm just giving examples. You know, I can still make that change with my young adult who's in his middle 20s, and even own some of it and say, look, forgive me. You were kid number 1. You know, doing the best I could.
Well, I try to tell, I tell my husband that too, with his parents, if he gets frustrated about anything, and they're awesome. They have been awesome parents, but I'm like, listen, they have never had adult children. And I'm like, and you're not the easiest adult child either. Like,
oh yeah, right.
So I'm like, just how you get frustrated with our teenagers and our kids or whatever. Can you imagine your parents? I'm like, not only do they have you as their child, but then you do things so differently than they raised you to do. And so then they have to also watch you parent differently and be grandparents. And so like, I'm like, you got to give everybody the grace that they just, you know, they need, because they're doing the best job that they can. And it's just hard on all of it. It's so humbling. I feel like I always tell people it's marriage and children that really reveal your issues. Like,
that's the truth, isn't it? I always say God always, in terms of the kids, God always gives you one to keep you humble. And it might not be the same one in the season, you know, it might be this one and then the next season, that one. And some people only need 2 kids and some need more, but somebody's going to keep you humble. And so even, you know, with work I do, I mean, I'm like, well, Lord, you know, I mean, keep me humble, because it's still always a journey and you're figuring things out, and they're so uniquely wired. I mean, you guys know you have multiple kids. There's not a one of them the same. No. None of them came out with an instruction manual. So, you know,
and my mom, she always says, you know, don't ever say my child will never, or she's like, you better write those words on a cookie so they're a lot easier to eat later, because
I love that. I totally agree with that.
I mean, because we don't know. We're all a bunch of sinners and we are raising some sinners. And I remember a mentor also saying that the Lord just said, you know, listen, I've got problem children too. And I still love them.
So
and I
good.
still, you know, God even had the creator of us all. He's got problem children too. And you're right. Like, he's the only perfect parent. That we have to turn to. Oh,
well, Kelli, this has been so amazing and good. And this is going to be an episode I know I'm going to listen to again when I'm feeling myself in the yellow, so I can try to get out of my red. I'm going to tell Amy, take a back seat, Amy. You're not in charge all the time. I love that. And I'm going to encourage Flo to, you know, be more in charge whenever I'm dealing with red children, or even myself when I'm in the red. I know people can find out more about you and attuned parenting and help for them when they're weary at your website, which is kelliwild.com. And we'll link all of the resources we talked about today in our show notes. But are there any additional resources that you would recommend parents check out, or
Books.
podcasts or books or websites that you just say, like, every parent should have this?
Well, I thought it might be helpful to share. There's a book by Dr. Dan Siegel, and it's called Parenting from the Inside Out. So it is more focused on this. And he also has an expertise in like neuropsychology. So he's well-versed also with just that other part I was sharing, that physiological aspect. But that's a good one to check out if you want just a good solid dive into that topic. I'm also akin to, it's called trust-based relational intervention. So it's TBRI, and I'm a TBRI practitioner. That is a modality centered around attachment and how to parent, particularly in a therapeutic manner, if you have children who maybe have some woundedness from their early life before they came to you. It was really designed originally out of research from working with children with trauma histories. So a lot of children from foster care and adoptive families. But what I've found is if it works with children who come from hard places, it tends to work with most kids.
Yeah.
They have a book called The Connected Child. I will say, if that's not your child's story and you read this book, you're going to read examples that may not feel like they relate to you, but the principles are really solid and they work well. And it is about me, we, thee. I mean, that's my language for how I talk about that, but it's about that, right? It starts with understanding our own attachment style, working through some of our own stuff, at least beginning and being mindful of that. And then we're always focused on relationship. And then, yeah, we need to correct misbehavior. We need to deal with things. But how do we do that in a way that's most effective so we're not wasting energy and actually often hurting the situation, right? Sometimes it's just not changing anything. So we want to see healing. We want to see behavior change sometimes in our homes and with our children. We want to help them learn and grow. But we've got to do it in a way that actually supports their development and how the brain works. And sometimes we're actually working against that and we don't realize it.
It's so good, Kelli. Gosh. Well, I know we have filled a full episode with all of your wonderful wisdom, and I'm so grateful and thankful for it. I know Paige is too. Like I said, we'll post all of these details in our show notes so folks can find what we're talking about. Kelli, thank you so very much for your time with us today. I just know this is going to bless a lot of our listeners, and we're just grateful and thankful for you joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, I've already subscribed to your email list, so
Same.
we're going to encourage everybody to do that because I know you're going to be dropping in our inbox all kinds of nuggets of wisdom. And
Yes,
I feel like we could spend days and days together still learning from you, Kelli. So thank you. So good.
Thank you guys for having me. It really was great to see y'all, and I'm cheering for you.
thank
from
you, Kelli.
afar. Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Okay.
We're doing the same for you. So, all right,
Okay.
everybody, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Well, that closes another chapter on the Page of Our Lives podcast. Did you know we're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Well, we are. Just search for Page of Our Lives podcast. Curious where to find things we mention on the show? Check out our show notes on our website, pageofourlivespodcast.com. And if you liked today's episode, be sure and share it with a friend. And we would love for you to leave a rating or a review in your podcast player. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.